Now we're just about to dive into the meat of all this with moving objects in 3D space and animating and moving the camera. Now before we do, it's really important to talk about how the 3D space works and how the XYZ axis works so that you can move all this stuff on the controller without getting completely lost. This can be really tricky if you've not experienced working with these 3D supercontrollers in the past, or if you're unfamiliar with the X, Y, and Z axis concept. Now, if you are familiar with all of that, then you probably don't need to pay too much attention to this, but for everybody else, here we go. This diagram that's included in the user manual for Toon Boom Storyboard Pro 3D is a really good way to just get this idea fixed in our minds. There's a x-axis, a y-axis, and a z-axis going from front to back. So these are symbols that have been used in mathematics and in 3D programs for ages. So it's just wise to get used to them right away, and we'll be using them over and over again. So the x-axis, you can think of that as being the horizontal axis from side to side or from east to west. It's kind of the way that if it were a pole, it would be like when a tightrope walker is holding a pole in a horizontal fashion. The y-axis goes up and down, or vertical, also known as north and south. And this is kind of like a flagpole. If you're running a flag up and down a flagpole, that's along the y-axis. And finally, the z-axis is the one that's the most tricky, working on a flat surface like we are. We're trying to show some depth. So the z-axis goes from front to back, and it's something that we're going to have to turn objects or use these other views to really see how we can move in all 3 dimensions when we're drawing on a 2-dimensional picture plane. So let me go back to the first shot here, and with our controller, I can show you how all those different axes work. There are a whole lot of different ways that you can use this Super Transform tool. One is to scale the ship, which we saw right at the beginning. That was the first thing that we did with it, was to scale. We are going to be able to stretch and squash with this tool. We're going to be able to move with this tool with a lot of precision. And we're also going to be able to rotate with this tool, and we can also even free rotate with this tool as well. So we're going to go through those very quickly, and if it goes a little bit too quickly, then we can always just watch it again to review. So one at a time, we're going to look at those things. The first one is scale, which, like I said, we saw before. That's if you use the outer box and you go to one of the corners. If you click on that and you stretch away from the center, it scales bigger. If you stretch toward the center, it gets smaller. And the next one is the stretch and squash. So now we have to start looking at the 3 different axes, 3 different colors. The first thing that we'll notice when you want to stretch and squash is that there's red over here and green over here, and if we rotate it a little bit, we'll be able to see blue colors in here too. Each one of those colors is going to represent one of the axes, but it's going to be important to know which of these little gizmos to touch. So the first one we'll talk about is the stretch and squash. Those you want to be using the square handles. There's one there, and there's one visible there, there's one visible here, and there's one visible here. So these are all color coordinated. So you just like X, Y, and Z, you'll want to memorize these different colors. Green represents the y-axis. The y-axis is the axis that controls the up and down, or the north and south. Again, like a flagpole is the y-axis. So when we're going to be stretching and squashing, you want to grab that green square and drag upward and drag downward. Okay, I'm going to press undo to get it back to where it was before. By the way, you can always just click on the object away from those transform bars, and you can drag. That's the simplest way, but I want to show you the control, how the controls on the Super Transform tool. So that was stretch and squash, where we use the square handles. The next one is moving it, and to move the object using the Super Transform tool, you want to click on the arrows. It will only let me move it once I've clicked on it and dragging. I cannot move it in any other way than directly vertical, directly north-south, directly up and down. So why would I want to restrict myself like this? Well, again, it gives me a lot of control so that I can just control the height of the object rather than moving it around. If I want to move it on the x-axis, which is the side to side, I can click on that arrow and I'm only moving it from side to side. And you'll notice in these other windows that when I am moving it from left to right or from east to west, that it's kind of going at an angle in this top view. And that's because all of these X, Y, Z axes are relative to the object itself. Because this object has been turned a little bit, when I'm moving it from side to side, it's kind of moving at an angle. So I'm going to reset this to be more straight on. And now when I drag that red handle, you can see that it's perfectly moving from side to side or from west to east. An interesting thing to note is that in this particular view, I can't see the blue arrow that controls the z-axis, from the front to back. The reason why is just because it's rotated to a point where that blue arrow is pointing directly at me, so I can't see it. So if I were to turn this a little bit, I could see that blue arrow appear, and I could move this along the z-axis. But in the case like this, that's why we have multiple windows. I'm going to just undo so it'll go back to where it was. And that's why if you have to move along the z-axis, it's easier to do it in either the side view or the top view. So here you can see it's much easier to get to that blue arrow. I will click on it and move it forward, move it away from the camera, and then move it back toward the camera. And I can do the same thing here in the top view. I can control that blue arrow to control the z-axis. In every one of these views, there's going to be one of the controllers that you can't see, and that's why it's so useful.